congratulations to the officers that have been inducted today, and of course to the new members. We started the sport, the Lions Club, in 2013, and I'm so happy that after my presidency, this club continues to be very active at the Pamantasan Lungsod of Pasig. So I wish everyone the best of luck in Good evening. It's Tuesday night, and we are here at the Career Assistance Program, airing every Tuesdays from 8 to 9 p.m. So you can follow, like, and subscribe to us on all our social media platforms at the Education Channel. We are on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. So for tonight, it is my pleasure and privilege to present the University Scholars Association of the Philippines during their fourth international convention, where they invited me as the keynote speaker. So I'll be speaking on promoting the values of diplomacy, leadership, and resiliency to promote global partnerships and sustainable development. So you may ask, how can you be involved in international relations, and how do you hone your leadership skills even as you are still a student? And finally, how can you overcome difficulties and obstacles that may be in the way of your career development in order to experience resiliency? So all of those matters I'd like to be discussing with you in the segment today, wherein I give some concrete examples to our university scholars on how to overcome all of their challenges currently being faced in the midst of the pandemic, and for them to continue their university studies and have academic excellence in their studies. So join me tonight here at the Career Assistance Program. I hope that you'll be enjoying your time with us tonight. So I'd like to speak about bringing the world to the Philippines, as I've mentioned, promoting the theme that you have decided on for your convention, which is really talking about the values of diplomacy, leadership, and resiliency towards global partnership and sustainable development. So I'll try to break it down for everyone, especially because our audience comprised of university scholars and stakeholders in the education sector. So let me begin with how it was when I was a young person. I think most of our audience can relate to this particular. Just 1 moment, please. Okay. So I'd like to make my introduction by citing a book. I know it sounds really maybe antiquated, but yes, this was a book that informed and influenced me to weave international relations in the fabric of my life, both on a personal and professional level. So this author, who was educated in England since she was 8 years old, from elementary until the time she finished her undergraduate. So if you can see from the jacket of this book, it's a 70-year-old book, but here you can see in the center of Southeast Asia, the Philippines in the map. So we're very much geographically centered in terms of our proximity to the different countries in Southeast Asia, and yet we are kind of insulated in the sense that it's quite difficult to travel to the Philippines unless you had to travel by boat or by plane because of our very archipelagic nature. So later I'll explain how that actually influences us in terms of our culture and our way of thinking. Then here, when we talk about activities or the skills that you might actually possess in order to manage international relations. And so our goal is, again, to narrow it down, to turn chaos into clarity. And as a facilitator here, it's really to keep the session on track and ensure everyone participates in our discussion. Of course, we have a very large audience. I think today I will not be able to actually have an interactive session with you, but I hope that this is going to be very interesting for you. Again, I emphasize about the central location of the Philippines here in Southeast Asia. I mentioned about the author. So this was the author of the book. What was very extraordinary, I believe, about this book is that it was written by an Asian author about Asia, but she was very much influenced by the Western perspective that she was educated in. And at first, when she discovered her cultural heritage as an Indian, she wrote an earlier book called A Long Way from Home. Eventually, she was able to leave her home country again. And so that's the reason why the name of the book is East of Home, because she traveled to those countries east from India. So namely, they were Japan, China, Indonesia, and the rest of the Indochina at the time. You had this, still did not have those countries of Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia separated. They were all Indochina under the French. So she was able to travel to all of those countries after World War II. And what was very interesting about her travels was her immersive experience. So in all of the countries that she traveled to, she learned the languages of the people of that particular country. And then she became interested and studied substantially and deeply the aspects of each culture that she was interested in. For example, education and the arts were her primary interest. So she studied it very deeply. And so the reason why even 70 years after this book was written, it had such an impact on me, it's because I wanted to aspire to be like this author. I want to actually immerse experiences into both my personal and professional life so that it will feed the kind of intellectual curiosity that I had to learn about people, cultures, and different heritages, and how it could be brought back to the Philippines so that it could have some adaptation in what would be applicable to our country. Um, mhm. In 1985, so I know that most of you maybe were not born at the time. It was when I became a college student. So this is just a little bit like a flashback to my autobiography. But I believe that's when I also started to hone my skill in leadership. So the first year I was in the university, so I became the president of my cohort. They usually would have a block during the freshman year. But this was also a historic year because I participated in the student movement, which actually culminated in the February 1986 February Revolution. So actually, I still have my historic grades in my transcript of records because that second semester in my academic year, I almost did not go to my classes, and instead I had to take the examinations instead. So that there in my transcript of records, I still have a pass or fail. I did not actually go to my class. But to have a more effective and efficient leadership, one really should be trained in terms of competence, character, and of course, the particular knowledge that you would need to lead different organizations. So later, when I became a sophomore, I also joined a religious organization. So that in itself is not unusual in the Philippines. But what was unusual in this religious organization was its international affiliations. So just 2 years after I read the book East of Home, I embarked on what I would consider as the summer of my life. So with this religious organization, I spent 3 months in 4 countries in Europe, namely Italy, France, Spain, and England, participating immersively into the different charities that the religious organization was involved in. So we traveled to big cities and small towns, stayed with religious organizations and congregations, and participated and interacted with people of different nationalities who were either marginalized or disadvantaged. Eventually, I became a member also of ISEC, that's the French acronym for the International Association of Students in Business and Economics. And the main program that they have is the International Traineeship Exchange Program. So here in this photo, we had different chapters that we met with the different Asia Pacific regions. So before we had 78 member countries, now I think they would number 102 already. And through this process, I was able to actually interact with people of different countries, first in our region, Asia Pacific, and then later on to expand it to the different regions also of the world. So in 1981, so I already graduated from college. So I did two things before I graduated from college. I applied to enter the UP College of Law. And at the same time, I also applied for the International Traineeship Exchange Program. So I was accepted to both, except at the time, the computers were not yet prevalent, so that the matching process takes 1 year. So in the meantime, so I did study law already during my first year. And then after I finished my first year, I became a legal researcher for the UP Law Center Institute of Human Rights and wrote a paper talking about the developmental concepts in Muslim Mindanao. So this was even before the framing of the organic law for the autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao. At the same time, I also took a leave of absence in my second year to become an international traineeship exchange program participant through ISEC. For 18 months, so through a dual technology course at the University of Bayreuth. So this is a model wherein the concepts that are applied, the concepts that we have studied in school are actually applied to a particular setting, a workplace environment, for example. So through that process, one is able to actually be very grounded in both the concepts as well as the practice or application of the particular field of study. So this is how it was for me in 1991. This was also a very historic time to have been in Europe because this was just a few months after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And so there was a lot of opening up of the East European countries. They were either declaring their independence, breaking up, or going into war. So in 1992, for example, in 1991 still, I traveled to the former Czechoslovakia. Now you would have the Czech Republic and Slovakia as separate sovereign nations in order to participate in the European Youth Forum on democracy, because this was especially interesting because we had just revived the different form of government from 1986 when our 1987 constitution was constituted at the time. So this was a kind of discussion that we had. And of course, we were before the Prime Minister Václav Havel of Czechoslovakia. So he was very instrumental in the democratic movement eventually in the sovereign nations of the then Czech Republic and Slovakia eventually. Then in 1992, as I was ending my stint with ISEC for the International Traineeship Exchange Program, I was also tapped by ISEC International, which was then headquarters in Brussels, not yet the capital of the European Union at the time, in early 1992, to be a member of the international audit team because of my background in business. And Budapest, and the Congress was conducted in Budapest because it was the first East European country to actually introduce the market economy after the fall of the former Soviet influence domain of sphere of influence of the East European countries. 1993, I then returned already to the Philippines to resume my law studies, but still participated in many, I think for me, paper writing contests and even like presentations in international conferences. So I'm here in Malmö, Sweden, together with other Asian student delegates to the International Student Congress, where I presented the paper representing the Philippines to talk about the influence of religion on our culture. Then fast forward to 2000, so by 1995, I already became a lawyer. So my first legal position was at the office of the then second-term Senator Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, where I first became a legislative staff, and then eventually became the legal resident agent of internationally affiliated companies for developmental projects in the Philippines. So among those projects that I did, I was also always interested in the academe, was the modernization of the Department of Emergency Medical Services at the Philippine General Hospital to address, of course, the need for emergency medical services in the Philippines. So by year 2000, I had embarked on my graduate studies as a scholar of the Japanese government. So I'm here with my cohort of Ministry of Education scholars at the Tohoku University, where we undertook our intensive Japanese language program, and where I also graduated with my master's and my doctoral degrees in business administration, major in finance and business analytics. So this is me in 2006 with other co-graduates from the ASEAN region. So I think I'm joined here from the persons from Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam, with other Japanese Ministry of Education scholars in 2006. Later, upon my return to the Philippines, I joined the faculty of the Asian Institute of Management, where I taught international business and globalization. And here, during one of those international lectures, so I made in Kokura University. So this was one of the original sites for the target of the first atomic bomb. Eventually, of course, it landed in Hiroshima. So there's, of course, a very historic and contentious history here with respect to the relations geopolitically between Western countries and the Asia Pacific region, which is, of course, of interest in various lectures that I have conducted. In 2008, also, I brought the Teachers Helping Teacher, which was an Asia Pacific based non governmental organization composed of education professionals from around the world who would like to conduct in service training. So that was when we started with San Jose del Monte because of our strong affiliation with the then mayor now. The late Honorable Angelito Sarmiento. And so that's the reason why we brought to the division office of the Department of Education the in-service training program for English language teachers. Later, we had a group from Hue, Vietnam. So I think Dr. Antero might remember this room. It is in First City Providential College, where we had brought a group from Hue, Vietnam, and other international professors for the Teachers Helping Teachers delegation that conducted the program for approximately 300 public school teachers. 2011, this was already prior to my appointment as the university president of the Pamantasan Lungsod ng Pasig in March of that year. I was supposed to deliver a lecture in my alma mater, Tohoku University, located in Sendai, when it was hit on March 11, 2011 by earthquake, tsunami, and the Fukushima nuclear power plant radioactive leak. So instead, I had to move my lecture to Osaka University in the southern part of Japan that was not as affected by the catastrophe. 2013, I guess before the advent of K-pop, I was invited to deliver a lecture in Gyeongbok College in Korea, in the most historic city in Andong, which is in the middle of Korea, was a former capital during the Shilla dynasty, on how to become globally competitive students to students of business, because there was much that needed to be done in terms of rehabilitation of the Korean economy after its failure to pay the debts to the International Monetary Fund. So how very different it is the current situation now in South Korea. 2014 was also when I returned to Germany upon the invitation of the German Academic Exchange Council in Nuremberg, where I did my traineeship around 20 years ago, to deliver an expert seminar on dual technology, which is really this modality of educational institutions that looks into both the concept. You have, of course, the principals from the DAAD and the other representative from Malaysia, from the ASEAN region. Then it was also this year in 2014 that I became appointed as the International Affairs Director of the Tennessee Renewable Energy and Economic Development Council, which is comprised of academic institutions, local government units, and private organizations or entities that promote the awareness about renewable energies and how it could be used for economic development to boost the economy. So in Tennessee, where they have the Tennessee Valley Authority, so it's very big because they are actually supplying power to 8 states in the area in the southern part of the United States. In 2016, of course, you will have the implementation of the K-12 program in the Philippines, a full implementation of the K-12 program after the landmark legislation was passed in 2013. And one of the seminal ideas was to actually benchmark the Philippine educational system to that of the ASEAN. It is continuing. And so I did a lecture for the Bandung College of Education in Surabaya, Indonesia, in order to look into the possible models of equivalency or benchmarking with our other ASEAN country members. 2019, this was with respect to the delegation that was invited by the Canadian Bureau of International Education to conduct a study on the Canadian Community College model for possible adaptation to the Philippines. It's a 3-month training program in Camalson College, located in Victoria, Canada, supposedly the warmest part of Canada. And so we look into the possibility of adapting equivalency from stack credentials in the Institute of Technologies to offering associate degrees. So this is still a work in progress after I had delivered the comprehensive report in December 2019 to the Commission on Higher Education. And then again, this is a little bit of a time lapse insofar as my presidency. So that was like a decade. I hope my age is not showing. And the goal was really to transform the Pamantasan Lungsod ng Pasig, a city-funded local university, to deliver quality education, to have CHED-recognized academic programs, and to eventually become a recipient beneficiary school of the UniFast. Okay. So I think let me just show a little bit of the time lapse here of my decade-long presidency. So it has always been my advocacy to provide opportunities to our students, especially with respect to international exchange programs, even in a vicarious way. So you can see that we have hosted many international fora and collaborated with many international entities in order to bring that kind of experience to our members in the community. Yes. So to stop this. Okay. So moving forward, then here are some of the other programs that we initiated. We had the Philippine study tour that we had started with Konan University in Japan since 2013, and it's still ongoing until now. So every February, we would welcome university students from Konan University, from the College of Business and Accountancy, in order to undertake their Philippine study tour. So moving forward this year, before the very end of my presidency, I was accepted as a senior scholar in the Fulbright Advanced Research Scholarship at the University of Tennessee Martin, USA. So it was supposedly for 10 months, but because of the COVID, there were two modes of delivery that eventually happened. One was on the online aspect, when it was not yet possible to travel to the United States, and eventually, of course, for the remaining 5 months to look into the research for adopting the models of American community colleges in the Philippines. So I think just a little bit about the experiences in the University of Tennessee in Martin. So I think one is never too young or old to actually have this love of learning in whatever fields of study that you might find yourself in. It could actually be very expansive in terms of like the multidisciplinary approach. You don't have to limit yourself to your particular program. Okay. Yes. Okay. You don't have to limit yourself to your particular program, and at the same time, you could really expand yourself by continuing to challenge yourself intellectually to study and learn fields of study that you might not have previously been exposed to. So again, I mentioned about the Tennessee Renewable Energy and Economic Development Council. So that's an ongoing program to promote the awareness of renewable energies in the Philippines. And again, the study of the American college community colleges, which is not yet a typology that we have adopted. So in the Philippines, we just have now the university, the professional institutions, and the colleges as the modalities for higher education institutions that are currently being recognized by the CHED. So this is one of the priority areas, agriculture sciences, even in the Philippines. So this is very much promoted by the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, together with our counterparts in the Philippines. Of course, there's always social civic involvement. We have the Kiwanis group, or the Kiwanis club. So again, some speaking engagements that I have delivered. This is for the sciences. So you have environmental protection and conservation, and the conduct of scientific experiments. Of course, I talked about agricultural sciences as being a fertile ground for development.
So the University of Tennessee Martin is ranked 10 in the United States for agriculture sciences. They also have the Fossil Science Center to look into different studies of geology. Then they have the staff credentials for farming technologies and operations. And again, this is the partner, Jackson Community College, in order to have a pathway between associate degree and baccalaureate degree. So I mentioned about my long-standing affiliation and membership at the Phi Kappa Phi Honor Society. So wherever I go and find myself with the chapter, then there's some collaboration that I could continue to do with the Honor Society. So these were some of the lectures that I did during my time there at the University of Tennessee in Martin, emphasizing, of course, the 75th anniversary of the diplomatic relations between the United States and the Philippines, and the fact that we were granted our independence actually on the 4th of July of 1946 rather than on the eventual June 12th. That was changed in 1968 through legislation. And of course, just like any student, I would have my graduation from the University of Tennessee in Martin. So that was the very recent experience that I just had just a few months ago. So to continue challenging oneself, to look into what would be the most innovative in terms of developments in the area of education. Okay. So let's move forward. Also, before I left the United States, of course, I conducted some professional development activities, and this consisted of academic visits with other institutions. So specifically, they were with the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. As you might know, the state of Massachusetts is the most liberal in terms of its educational policies in the United States. And so we were talking about developing a University Without Walls program, or this is part of extension or outreach that could be done in a virtual space. Then we also looked at Long Island University for its very innovative Bachelor of Arts in Global Studies, wherein for every particular year, the students live in a different country. And so we talked about early childhood development in the College of Education and Creativity as being very transformative during early childhood development. So again, this is really expanding yourself outside of your fields of study to involve yourself in research, in collaborations with different institutions. And of course, these are the graduate students who are developing different programs to encourage creativity in early childhood development. So one of the research findings that they had is that toddlers, those from 3 to 7, may also be educated using online learning courses. Then I traveled to the state of Arizona, first to Mesa Community College, again to study about community colleges, then to the tribal governments to look into indigenous community as one of the aspects of the community college model. And of course, on the legal part of it, because of the concerns of indigenous community rights, and upon the invitation of American University of Sovereign Nation to also deliver a lecture linking the American Community College model to that of indigenous education. So that was a part of the lecture that was delivered. And as you can see, they have already adopted a hybrid format in almost all academic institutions in the United States, that you will have some in-person participants, and then at the same time, the majority of the students or the participants will be online. So this is already the modality that has already been adopted, and possibly this is what will potentially happen to us also in the future in the Philippines, granting that we may have some limitations to returning to face-to-face conduct of classes. So this is really a professional development insofar as education or being an educator is concerned, but also in terms of like leadership and bringing all of those innovations to the Philippines. So upon my return to the Philippines from the Fulbright, so the initiative that we've started was really to establish the education channel. So this is a social media platform that provides the possibility of having the stakeholders in the education sector be exposed to the innovations in the world or different countries. And so in the program that we have implemented, which is AAA Live, what we potentially do is to interview those in the academic community and beyond from different fields of study to really speak about the different innovations and developments in their own particular fields. So as I've mentioned, so it is through these different interactions with experts and international persons that we become very much soaked or immersed into the opportunities that we could potentially bring to the Philippines and then how to adapt them to the Philippine context. Sometimes, of course, it takes time for the ripening of ideas to have its full adaptability in the Philippines. And yet, we must continually seek those opportunities. So again, I mentioned about the University of Tennessee in Martin. So even though I was focused more on like the community college model because it straddles almost all of the fields of study. So I had different exchanges with students, faculty, administrators, different stakeholders in the university in order to be informed about the workings actually of the university and how it's able to navigate and optimize its different resources in order to achieve its objectives. So that in itself is part of training of leadership. And the resiliency part of that is that when one finds yourself in, if you find yourself in uncertain area, then it is drawing on your personal strength so that you could negate or minimize or mitigate the potential detrimental or negative effects of finding yourself in a different uncertain territory. So this always happens when you're being exposed to a culture not of your own, because you will have to navigate these different cultural environments by being uncomfortable and then eventually having the resiliency to adapt to what is acceptable culturally and of course within the particular environment such as this the academic community of a particular organization. So here they have a governor school program which is a 30-day immersive program for incoming seniors identified by the state of Tennessee who are most promising, and they begin their immersion 30 days before the actual beginning of their academic year as incoming freshman students. Our most laudable project of the state of Tennessee, specifically because they wanted to emphasize a particular field of study. In this case, it was for agricultural sciences. Then, of course, I also had the opportunity to interview persons from the Philippines or of Filipino heritage who have made strides in the United States and in North America, also Canada, so that their achievements could be lauded insofar as they had gone a long way from the Philippines in terms of what they could potentially contribute to their immigrant country. Also, to invite stakeholders, legislators, and policymakers with involvement in education in the Philippines to talk about the possible policy changes that can be done to inform our educational sector. And so Mr. Perry Ferrer is an advocate for dual technology to be adopted in the Philippines. And of course, the Honorable Sherwin Gatchalian, being the chairman of the Senate Committee on Basic Education, Arts and Culture, talked about the current educational crisis that we are undergoing brought about by the COVID pandemic. Then, of course, we also participated in different international conference participation. So it's not only curricular in nature that you need to be informed about, but one of the main functions, again, of the higher education institutions will be to conduct research. So again, the particular area I've mentioned about, of course, promoting the Philippines in terms of its international relations with the United States in these lectures, and then having a global affairs perspective in promoting international relations between countries when you have global affairs. So again, I emphasize here, I told you about the Philippines and the archipelago. So we become much more insulated because it's very difficult for us to travel inside or outside the Philippines. And so, in many ways, that will, of course, limit our interaction with possible innovative ideas that are coming from outside the Philippines. So, we really have to make this effort in order to be informed of what is happening outside of the Philippines. So, again, I talked about the hybrid system of you would have the participants both online and in person. So that's been adopted around the world since especially during the pandemic. So this is a technology that has come of age. Potentially, it was not yet so accepted before, but now it has gained traction as the particular media of choice. And so that's why we want to leverage that in the education channel by introducing innovative programs that use the virtual space because this is already the technology that we will be living with for the future. So we also had some other areas that we participated in besides the Fulbright conferences. This was with the Asian Bioethics Association to talk about integrity of, again, I talked about the American University of Sovereign Nations and the injustices and discriminations that are experienced by indigenous communities or cultural communities around the world, regardless of whether they are in developed or developing countries. And the fact that we may be able to have the community college model to be adopted to the Philippines. We had the Asian Bioethics Conference because of the need to look into the integrity of life and the quality of life as it is informed by a human rights approach. So I talked about the access to quality education as part of the United Nations Convention of Human Rights and the Sustainable Development Goals for us to continue striving towards access to education. And then, of course, we had like emergency medical services. I mentioned my long-standing advocacy towards emergency medical services, and especially in the COVID era when we had shortages of medical personnel. To really look into this area on how we could train more lay persons. So we are bringing this particular model in the Philippines also beginning next month. Then we had, of course, the culture of peace. Again, a long-standing research interest of mine in the area of Southern Philippines on how we could promote economic development by promoting the culture of peace among the minorities and the governance systems of the autonomous regions. Then, of course, Public Health Ambassadors Conference is the main concern right now that we have around the world, the health and hygiene. So I emphasize about, again, the indigenous community. So it's spreading all of these different research interests that I have in order to present advocacies or innovative concepts that could have its applications in the Philippines. So we're also involved in a research being conducted now for public health education, focusing on e-learning and how allied health and health professionals could be trained in a virtual space in order to do away with the usual related learning experiences, which is done when you have the conduct of face-to-face classes. Again, remembering about sustainable developments on the local government setting when we had this very divisive war in the Mindanao area, like what happened to Marawi. So these are some of the discussions that we are currently also involved in. Then for the career assistance program, so what we want to provide are those areas where it is possible to use a virtual space to guide students from education to employment. So here we are introducing the career assistance program wherein we have partnered with private corporations in order to deliver virtual internships to our students. So specifically, this batch of students are the first cohort of students who will be graduating from those who undertook the K-12 program. So we want to introduce a pathway from education to employment. And this is done through the different virtual internships that are being offered by private internationally affiliated companies. So we have one as an example here of Accenture. that is interested to eventually have a near hire program, but first to allow the students to undergo a virtual internship on the Skills to Succeed Academy on what particular skills are important in the digital workplace environment. So again, we talk about manpower training, employment assistance. So this is really providing the virtual career guidance and counseling that would otherwise be provided by student services or Office of Student Services. But now it is done through an interactive, inclusive, and virtual space that these internships are being delivered. So this is a program that we have with the Education Channel also, both on broad for the broadcast program and off broadcast with the actual virtual internship being done with the companies themselves. So this is another program that we have. So I would like to invite our students because that's ongoing for us. So this is some of our corporate entity partners. You have Stack Trek, you have Trade Dynamics, and of course our affiliations in the United States. Some of the areas that we are discussing insofar as reducing the dropout rate of students during the pandemic. Then we also have a program, Spilling the Teas on Student Affairs and Services. Again, I've mentioned USAP was one of the guests. So I believe that's where we had initiated the contact recently to look into student organizations and social civic organizations, government agencies, and other entities in civil society to provide opportunities to our students through extracurricular activities. I mentioned the importance of honing leadership skills when I was a young and impressionable student by providing those opportunities in student organizations. Again, lastly, I would like to talk about virtual internships because this is already the training for the digital workplace environment. So, because of the work that I'm doing, there are some weeks that I'm not able to actually leave my home. So I do work from home and been very busy, but everything is done in the virtual space. So we really have to be able to make that transition eventually because that is going to be our future for this millennial generation. So now we're currently looking for students who would like to participate in the virtual internships in these different areas. So as you can see, it's all nationwide because of our network of corporate entity partners and organizations. So this is what we intend to do when we have the training for the digital workplace environment. So again, this is the training and immersive experiential learning to the students in an actual workplace environment to see the applications of concepts studied in school. So we take the concepts of dual technology course and apply it in the Philippine setting. As you know, you always have the circular memorandum order that you have to abide by. So these are the modalities of learning that can be undertaken. So of course, you still have your on-site activities or face-to-face. You can have your online with certain limitations. And then of course, the modules are very important insofar as they are the materials in digital form that could be utilized. And these are the modalities that can be undertaken for the students to accomplish all throughout their virtual internship. Research is, again, one of the areas that we should be of interest to us to develop in the Philippines because this is a very fertile area where we could actually utilize our abilities and to develop the critical thinking skills of the students, which are crucial to the so-called fourth industrial revolution. So research skills is definitely crucial in both the possibility of deepening your knowledge about your field of study as well as having success towards what could be your career trajectory. So all of these things that have been done, of course, we undertook a lot of research by looking into what are the possible modalities that could be adopted in the Philippines. So I invite all of our participants today. You can sign up virtually. You can reach us in our virtual space. We're all on social media platforms, and we do have our programs delivered off broadcast as well. So I think with that, I'd like to encourage everyone again that this is your time, the millennial generation. You are the future. And so what we probably need to do is to bring the world to the Philippines as a way of educating our people and really initiating and encouraging the advocacy to promote the values of diplomacy, that is continuing to have good international relations, to hone our leadership skills, to develop our resiliency in spite of all the difficulties. We should always find opportunities with crisis, and this is towards global partnership and sustainable development. So I hope that everybody has been very much informed and interested and activated with this discussion. And I look forward to meeting again all of you sometime. Okay? Mabuhay at maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat. Thank you very much.
It has been a most substantive discussion, definitely, with University Scholars Association of the Philippines. I hope you have been inspired by all that we have discussed today in order to clarify how, as students, you can develop your skills towards your career trajectory and your aspirations for the future. So join us again at the Career Assistance Program, airing every Tuesdays from 8 to 9 p.m. here at the Education Channel. Continue to follow, like, and subscribe to us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. So till next time, this has been your host, Attorney Amihan April M. Alcazar, PhD. Stay safe, everyone. Thank you.